Today we're going to be talking about how to choose your crops and how to plant for a fall and winter harvest season, which is right around the corner. And it's time for us to get you growing in this area. If your beds are not set up, you will want to watch the Square Foot Gardening class on my YouTube channel, Leslie Keza YouTube channel. And we will teach you how to choose your box, how to make a mix to put in it, and how to set up your grids for your box. So you won't want to miss that. If you haven't seen it, jump back, do that first, then come and watch this class. I hope that you will get the very best compost that you can afford, since this is going to be the bed and breakfast of your plants, and you want to have happy customers. So if you only have X numbers of dollars to put into your garden, spend the money on the growing mix, on quality compost, rather than on a fancy box. You can get by with a very simple growing box to contain your growing mix. If you scrimped on the compost, it's not too late to add some. Get some good quality compost, 2 or 3 inches worth on top of the bed, mix it into the top few inches of your growing medium, and you're going to be good to go. And these are examples of some good quality compost that you can get. The type that you get at a big box store that might cost $2 or $3 for a cubic foot probably is not the best. It'll get you by if you're mixing in some other things, but we want to have the best nutrient base for your plants that you possibly can. You're going to be glad that you did. So, are your grids set up? That is a very big question. When you look at a growing bed, the one here without the grid, when you're thinking about planting, you have to kind of envision how you're going to plant in this 4x4 foot area. Whereas if you have the grid in place, you're thinking 1 square foot at a time. And that's so much easier when you're thinking about your planning and your planting of your area. Now, again, choosing how you're going to set up your growing area and making a plan for your growing area is also much easier to log on your paper if you've got it by square foot. There are some inexpensive ways to do that, and you can just use Venetian blinds that you've cut, and then just take some wire landscape fabric pins and just pin them right down onto the surface of your soil. It does not have to be expensive to set up the grid. So hurry, hurry, hurry. It's not too late, even though we're heading into August here. It's not too late to get in even some summer crops. This will be your last chance to get in things like cucumber, bush beans, bush zucchini. You can do it if you get your seed and get that right into the ground. Last year I planted zucchini here in Tennessee, which is zone 7, on July 23rd, and I pulled those on October 20 because we had a frost. And so that gave them 89 days, and they did quite well. Summer squashes can mature in about 50 days and some cucumbers in about 60. So if you plant soon, you can enjoy these crops before the first frost. Keep in mind that these may take up more than 1 square foot, and cucumbers would benefit from some sort of a trellis. As you can see here in the picture, they grow very nicely when they're hanging from a trellis. Now, bush beans can take up a lot of space, and since you're starting with a small garden, I suggest 16 or 18 square feet to begin. It's a good idea to try a vining variety of zucchini and a trellis. But if that's all too much for you for this first growing season, putting in the trellis and trying to squeeze in a summer crop, don't even worry about it. We're just letting you know that this is a possibility if you decide to go there. If you do that, when you go out for your 5-minute a day daily check of your garden and you see those vines growing, your cucumber vines, whatever, just gently weave them in and out of the trellis or tie it loosely with some twine. You don't want to snug it up too tight because your vines may expand a little bit and you don't want to choke those out. But you can just skip this if you want and get right into our fall crops. For fall planting, the time is more critical than for the spring and the summer for 2 reasons. Cold weather is coming upon us, and the daylight hours are slowly getting shorter. And when that daylight hour reach less than 10 hours, it's called the Persephone period. And that begins on November 27. Now, basically, the plants stop growing at that point, but that doesn't mean the plants will die, and it doesn't mean that they won't hold in the ground. Many plants can still be harvested after that point. It's kind of like storing your plants in the refrigerator. To get to that point where your plants will be kept well after November 27, you want to have your plants pretty well grown by November 27 because they're not going to continue to keep growing. So this involves some planning. And the good news is that planning involves some cognitive functioning. So this is all good for your brain as well as for your tummy. The seed packets have on them a days to maturity listed, and that is really helpful because then you can plan your crops so that they will be mostly grown by that November 27 date. But the tricky part is that date to maturity date on the package is sometime from seed and sometime from when you're transplanting a small plant that might already be a month old. So for kale and collards, the date to maturity is from the date you put the seed in the ground. But for broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, the date from maturity is from a transplant. So we need to consider that when you're putting your seeds in the ground. How much time do you really have to get that crop grown? So knowing that some dates to maturity are from transplant, you might want to choose starts or plants, transplant plants for broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, or cauliflower. If this is your first garden, those things take up quite a bit of space. I would say don't do them, or plan to put them on the corner of a box so they have room to spread, and start from a start, especially for this first year. And we'll look at how to start starts in just a little bit. So let's talk about crops. Cool season crops are generally grown for their leaves or their roots. So leaves would be lettuce, spinach, kale, parsley, cabbage, Asian greens like pak choi, also greens like collards, cilantro, scallions, and then a few of the cool weather crops are actually flowers like broccoli and cauliflower. And then the root crops would be things that, of course, grow under the ground, and that would be your beets, your cabbage, and even your radishes. So notice, the cool weather crops are not fruiting crops, meaning that the edible part of the plant did not develop from a flower. So that would be things like tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchinis, peppers. When those plants grow, they put out a flower. The bees or other insects pollinate that, and then the fruit starts growing from there. So our cool season crops are not fruiting crops. They are generally leaves, roots, and sometimes flowers like the cauliflower or the cabbage or the cauliflower or the broccoli. So here's a little fun tip that you can do. Scallions or green onions are fast growing and they're excellent for continual harvest. And you can start them from seed, but for a little more fun, buy a bunch at the grocery store, cut it so that it's about 3 inches tall, and then take the root part and replant it in soil so that it's sticking up out of the ground, for an inch or so. Make sure that white part is in the ground with the roots. Don't cut the roots off. Put that in the ground and then eat the green parts, and the green part will regrow, and then you can cut it again and it should regrow again. So now let's talk about lettuce. There are heat-tolerant varieties that can be started now, like romaine, Bibb, Muir. There's a lot of them to choose from. And when the temperatures and the sun are intense, adding some shade with a sheet or some shade cloth or anything that you can find to help shade that a little bit would be good. Or if you're home, you can just take a spray bottle, a mist bottle, and spray them a couple times a day just to kind of cool them off a little bit. But if all that is too much, avoid planting lettuce in June or July and fill your garden with summer crops during that time and wait until August. And then you can start putting in these heat tolerant varieties and you're not going to have a whole lot of trouble with them. By the end of August, the cold tolerant varieties should be going in. And it's a good idea to succession plant. In other words, plant a few seeds or one square every week until the last suggested planting date. And that means planning to not plant every square at once. So you'll have some squares that you know, I'm going to hold off and plant that a little bit later. So from now until mid-September, you can plant lettuce seed. Heat-tolerant lettuces will be from this date until end of August, and then the cool-tolerant lettuce crops will be from the end of August until about mid-September. And one of the sweet things about growing lettuce is that it can be eaten even before it's full grown. Baby lettuces are delicious and can be planted a little later since they are not growing to their full size. But whether you're growing them to full size or to baby, they're not going to grow much more after this Persephone period. And they will grow slower before November 27 because the days are getting shorter as we move from summer into fall or winter. Therefore, you're going to need to make some adjustments. So let's talk about timing here for a little bit. When you say you want to grow a 55-day lettuce and you want it to be mostly grown by November 27, the date for maturity for lettuce is from the date the seed is planted. So we're going to come over here and we're going to count back from November 27 to the 55 days, which brings us to October 3rd. Now, because the days are shorter, it's going to grow a little slower. So we're going to add 14 days onto the date to maturity and go back to September 19. And that would be your last date of planting that lettuce seed outside for that variety. So September 19 would be your last one. But you could start planting it in late August. So late August, you could put in a square's worth, and then the first week of August, second week of August, or you could go every 2 weeks, but you would have that time until September 19. Plant your lettuce, 55-day lettuce, and have it be ready for November 27. And we're only talking about planting a square foot. So even though you may say, oh, I got to plant now and then I got to plant again in 2 weeks, you're going to be planting 1 square foot, which is a small amount of seed in that area. So it won't take you very long at all. And then your cold hardy lettuces should hold for eating for at least another month, even with some minimal protection. So you're going to be able to eat that lettuce for quite a while. And believe me, it's a wonderful thing to go out in October or in November and pick fresh fruit from your own garden. So if you're growing baby lettuces, which might only take 30 days to grow, then you can plant even later. So again, we have the November 27 Persephone period begins. Count back 30 days because you're only going to grow them to a small lettuce. That brings you to October 28. Count back 14 days to make up for the slower growing period with the days getting shorter. And that brings you to October 14, the last planting date for that lettuce outside. So all the way from the end of August till mid-October, you could be planting lettuce for harvesting baby lettuce or small lettuce lettuce plants. So it gives you a longer planting period there. Some varieties for cold hardy are Marvel of 4 Seasons, Winter Marvel, Winter Density, and Butterhead varieties are also really good. And if the temperatures get really cool, you can take a plastic milk bottle or any other type of container and just put it over that lettuce if the temperatures are going to be down in the 20s, and then just remove it the next morning. It's pretty simple to do. Or you could just throw a blanket or a light tarp over that, and that should help to protect the lettuce as well. One last thing about growing lettuce and other greens. If you add a layer of mulch underneath the plants, the lettuce will have less dirt and the spinach will have less dirt, or whatever greens you're growing will have less dirt splashing up on them when it rains. And that makes it easier to wash. So you might put a piece of weed barrier under there. You might put some straw under there, a little compost. You could use some wood chips. There may be some other mulches as well that you could use around there, and that would make the washing of your greens a whole lot easier. But if you're using wood chips, keep them on the surface. Don't mix them in with your mix. So when you pull out your lettuce and you want to replant them there, slide those wood chips off to the side so that you're not mixing on them when you're planting your next seed or when you're mixing in some more compost into that mix. Cold tolerances for various plants. Baby beet leaves can tolerate 20 degrees, baby kale 15 degrees, baby Swiss chard 20 degrees. The older plants cannot handle repeated freezings. Mustard greens can handle to about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, and bok choy or pak choy and other Asian greens to about 25 degrees Fahrenheit. So they're pretty cold hardy. Cold, drying winds are the worst enemy for the winter greens. So consider covering them when the days are going to be either very cold or cold and windy. These crops like it cool, so it's not necessary to have them covered all the time. Remove that covering when the temperatures get a little warmer. And if your raised bed is small, you might be able to put some sort of a PVC frame over the top of your bed and just throw some plastic over it or a tarp over it and anchor it with some bricks. If your garden is small, it's pretty easy to take care of all that. Now, the superhero of cold tolerant vegetables is spinach. It can recover from as low as 10 degrees. So you cut the outer leaves and the lower leaves, and the inside leaves will continue to grow, so you can have a continual harvest of spinach. It's a wonderful winter crop. Carrots love cool weather and are sweetest when they spend time at temperatures near freezing when mature. The greens can tolerate freezing temperatures, but don't let the roots actually freeze. If the growing box is on legs, that is going to freeze more quickly than a raised bed on the ground. And raised beds on the ground freeze before the natural ground. So to prevent freezing, you have a few options. You could cover it with 6 to 18 inches of straw, depending on how cold or how long it's going to be cold. Or you could cover it with at least 3 inches of mulch or compost. You could cover it with a tarp. You could just weight down around the edges with some rocks or some bricks to keep it away. I will say, though, that if you put a tarp or plastic directly over the carrot bed and it rains or you get ice or anything, that's going to crush down your plants. So you may want to prop it up a little bit if you use something like that. Or if you're growing your carrots in grow bags, or your beets in grow bags, or your winter crops in grow bags, you can always move them inside the garage or the shed for that short period of time and then put them out again. Now it's time to learn how to plant in a square foot garden.
Hi, it's Leslie in Tennessee, and today we're going to talk about how to plant your seeds in the square foot gardening method. So I have here a tray. I just put some sugar in there, and we're going to pretend this is a square foot. If you're supposed to put one seed in the square foot, you just go right in the middle, and that will be good. If you're supposed to put 4 seeds in the square, you just take your finger down, you take your finger across your square foot. This is assuming you have the grid in place in your square foot garden. And then you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's how you would plant 4 in a square. If it says to plant 9 in a square, you're going to put your fingers like the victory sign and come down the middle and come across like this And now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 places to plant your seeds in the square. If it says to plant 16 in the square, and there are some plants that you do 16, you'll come down and across like you did for 4, but then you're going to divide those 4 into 4. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 places to put your seeds. Now, if it says to plant your seeds 1 inches deep, let's just take a look at this ruler here. If I put my finger up against the ruler, 1 inch is just about to this first knuckle right here. 1/2 inch is about to the bottom of my fingernail. 1/4 inch would be halfway of my fingernail. So most of your seed packages are going to tell you 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch deep, and 2 inches deep is about to a little further than the second knuckle, although I've never seen anything say do 2 inches deep. Other quick measurements for the garden would include your hand like this is generally about 4 inches, and with your fingers spread, you usually have about 6 inches. So you'd have to experiment with your own hand, but these are quick guidelines that you can use in your planting of your garden.
So just a quick review. We have the square foot spacing here. So it's either 1, 4, 9, or 16. And the way you tell is when the seed packet says thin to so many inches. So spacing guidelines, and you can find this particular spacing guideline on Phipps Conservatory online. It's a free booklet on plant spacing like this and on the square foot garden method. So if it says 1 per square foot, 1 per 12 inches, or 1 per foot, you put 1. If it says 6 inch spacing, or if the seed packet says thin to 6 inches, then you would put 4 in a square. And how does that work? Because if a square foot is divided into 4 equal quadrants, then you have a 6 inch by a 6 inch side. And so when you put your seed right in the middle, you have a 6 inch area for growing that. And this would be for leaf lettuce, corn, chard, marigold, strawberries, but there's plenty of charts online about how to put what in what. Of course, your seed packet is your very best guideline because it'll tell you thin to 6 inches or something like that. And you might wonder, will it fit? Well, this one had 4 lettuces in the square foot. I had already harvested 1 when I took the picture, but you can see that 4 lettuces would fit in that square foot. Now, if you're growing lettuces or greens from baby greens, you can plant them closer. Baby lettuces would easily fit 9 in a square, just like spinach does. And if you want smaller greens, such as mesclun, the seeds can be planted as close as 1/2 inch apart. There are so many varieties of lettuces, likely because lettuce is a favorite of gardeners to grow. If you plant lettuce or mesclun seed directly into the garden, water the soil first and then cover it loosely with the growing medium. Keep the soil moist until the little plants have germinated and they take root. But make sure to gently water because those little seeds can get moved around and then your spacing isn't going to be appropriate. So sometimes I use a little condiment bottle like this and I just gently water until those seedlings pop up. And if the seedlings are really small, I might continue to water with my little squirt bottle just to not bowl over my small little plants. You could also put a light layer of straw over the seed bed, and that will help with the not moving of your seeds. But a light amount of straw, maybe 1/2 inch of straw over that bed. And don't use hay because hay has seeds in it. Now, this is just a gentle reminder, when you're planting and planning in your square foot garden box, remember the tallest plants should be on the north or the west side of the box unless you want to shade the plants behind them. If you planted too many seeds in one hole, simply snip the extra plants off so that you don't disturb the roots from the plants. And if the plants are larger than what they're shown here when you get to the thinning, you can just snip them and add them to your salads. To avoid uneven spaces, you could even grow the seeds in little pots and then transplant them into the bed when they are large enough. So here's a video on how to do that.
Hi, it's Leslie in Tennessee, and today we're going to talk about transplanting our plants. When you want to start seedlings, which you often want to do, whether it's tomatoes in the cold weather for the warm weather, or if you're starting cool weather crops that it's too hot to germinate them outside, so you want to start them inside, the system is the same for the hot weather or the cool weather crops. One of the easiest things to do is to start the plants in larger containers than what you want them to be in the end. And then the individual plants we will transplant into here. Now you may say, why bother doing that? Why not just start right in here? Well, for one reason, if you start them right in here and you put one seed in each tray, what if 3 of them don't germinate? Now you have empty spots in your tray and it's taking up room under your lights or in your greenhouse or wherever, your windowsill, wherever you happen to be growing your plants. So by doing it this way, you know you're going to have 1 plant in each cell. Now, if you put 2 seeds in each one, then you're going to have to thin them and you've wasted seeds. So this is the way that they do it at a greenhouse, and so I'm going to teach you how to do it. I've got really high-tech tools here. I have a Sharpie, I have a pen, and my little starts. And then this is a growing medium. This is just a standard potting mix that I've also mixed with Pro Mix. And you can use any good seedling mix. The main thing is to get a good quality because you don't want to have lots of sticks and pieces of bark in your mix when you're trying to work in these little tiny cells. So to start, I've moistened the mix and I'm just going to go ahead and put it into the cells. If there's clumps of dry stuff, just either break it up with your fingers or brush it off and then wet it later. Just going to put these in here. Don't pack it too tight. You want it firmly, but not too tight because we're going to be trying to push our pen down in here to try to make a hole for our plants. See, we got some bark here. We're just going to go ahead and remove that. I'll level them off. Oops, that one's kind of not enough. Just fill them all up. Anything that's really coarse, just remove it. Okay, and I haven't been pushing too hard here. Then I'm going to take my Sharpie to kind of make a good size hole. Just press it down in there. Maybe expand it a little bit. You need a hole to get the roots in there without having to like cram them. So if you make a decent size hole. All right. And then I think I will do the pixie cabbage one right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and break them up. I'm going to break them up like this. And then you want to deal very gently with them because you don't want to damage the roots and you don't want to damage the stems. So very gently, kind of hold it by there. And then I got my pen. I'm just going to pop it down in there like that and then just use the pen and kind of pack it in around there. Just gently push it in. Occasionally you may lose one that you damage or something, but most of them, usually once you get the hang of it, they go in pretty easily. Just be gentle, because if you damage the stem, you've lost your plant. Poke it right in. And you can do this for tomatoes. You can do this for just about any crop. Some plants do not transplant well. You wouldn't want to do carrots or beets. The root crops do not transplant very well because you're disturbing the root, and it is a root crop. So don't do any root crops this way. Now, if your hole looks like it needs a little more soil, just tap a little more soil in there. And they may. And you don't always know what the germination is going to be. You might plant 15 seeds and only have 8 or 10 come up, so you just don't know. Especially if your seed is older, you may want to test it on a paper towel, take a few seeds and test it and see if it's ready, if it's still viable and will germinate for you. And that's it. And then I'm going to put my little pixie cabbage stick back in. But if you're transplanting, it's best not to put them out in the sun right away. Give them a little chance to get adapted, for their roots to get used to their new location.
So they were 1 week old here, and you can see the close-up is the ones that we were planting. Spinach, kale, Napa, and pixie cabbages were ready to transplant, and so those are called seedlings. Here they are all planted. When the plants are about 3 or more inches tall, then they can be transplanted out into the garden, or you could wait a little longer if it's still a little too hot, or if the insect pests still seem to be too active. At this point, they're called transplants. I like to still water these with my condiment bottle and not blow them over with a strong blast of water. And so I fill that up, just kind of go along the base of the soil and just water rather than doing a big overhead thing. We're going to talk more about watering here in just a second. So should you use seeds or should you purchase transplants or make your own transplant? That is the question. And the answer is it's totally up to you. Seeds are less expensive, and if you're buying seeds, you have a greater variety of lettuces or cucumbers or whatever you're growing. You have a greater variety to choose from when you're buying it from seed than if you might go to a big box store or a nursery and buy your plants. But there is absolutely no shame at all in starting from transplants, even if you purchase them. Now, watering. You can water by hand from a bucket that you've kept near your garden, and that would be nice sun-warmed water. You could just take a cup and pour it right down by the root of the plant. That is one way to water. You can use drip irrigation. You could water with a hose with a little sprinkler, or a little spray nozzle, a little mist nozzle, or a shower nozzle. You do want to keep the soil moist, especially if you have seeds or seedlings in the ground. You've got to make sure those roots get established. So if you have carrots planted at 1/4 of an inch below the surface of the soil and the top half inch of the soil dries out, your seeds are not going to be moist enough to be able to live. So while they're germinating and getting above the ground, you need to make sure you keep that moist. And then you want to water according to the needs of the plant. So when the plants are teeny tiny, they don't need as much water as a big plant. You do want to avoid getting the leaves wet if possible. That's why I like to use that little spray bottle or the little condiment bottle and just go along the bottom of the soil. If the leaves start turning yellow, cut back, you're watering too much, or it could be that the plants don't have enough nitrogen. And again, you'd want to be thinking about good quality compost at that point, or getting a good complete organic fertilizer to add to your growing mix. And that might be something like worm castings or a commercial brand of that. If you see mold growing on your plants or your plants start to rot, obviously cut back on the water. There's no set rule for how much to water because a lot of it depends on the temperatures and what type of plants that you have. Again, a big bushy pepper plant is going to need more water than a teeny tiny little plant. Drip irrigation is nice if you must. A lot of people are busy. They don't have time to get out and water by hand or with a cup. And it's okay to put in a drip irrigation system, but hand watering in one form or the other is part of the journey. It gets you close to the plants, but only you know your time restraints. And so do the best that you can. But when you get out there for your 5-minute garden check, like how's my garden doing? I'm going to go out to the garden for 5 minutes. Look at your plants, see if they're wilting or withering. If so, you know they need water. You could get your fingers down in the first few inches of that soil and just check, is it about as wet as a wrung out sponge? And if it is, then you know that is a good amount of moisture in that growing mix. While you're out there, prune off anything that looks like it's diseased or dying. And of course, take the time to talk to your babies. So this is your year to experiment with your small garden. August to June gardening may become your favorite time to garden because there's less heat from August until June, which means less watering, and there's also less insect pests. It might be a good idea to keep your winter garden to 3 or 4 different crops this first year. And try a little bit of succession planting and take good notes. Write down what you planted and when you planted it. And if you do anything different to it, if you add a little fertilizer or manure or something changes in the way you're caring for the plant, just jot that down. You don't need full sentences. You just need to have something that you can understand when you go back to read for next year. And then enjoy every success. Every farmer and gardener has times when there are crop failures. And so, it's an experiment. It's a new hobby that you're picking up and you're starting small, so it should be workable. Every garden has its own microclimate. That's a little different from your neighbor's yard or from the community garden in town. So you're going to have to do some trials. And so you do want to have those good notes because they're going to be one of your best textbooks for the following year. Don't get discouraged. The wonderful thing about gardening is you can always put in another crop. And maybe a couple of months from now, but maybe not. Maybe you'll be able to put another crop in within that day or two. So just relax, experiment, learn, enjoy, eat what you're growing with a thankful heart, and you'll be amazed at how much you're going to learn. And then it'll be time to expand your garden if you want to. Some of my favorite resources for beginners are Square Foot Gardening by Mel Bartholomew. The 4th edition is scheduled to come out in December of 2024. There is a 3rd edition available right now if you'd like, but if you can hold off till December for that 4th edition, it's supposed to be expanded and even better. And then 4-Season Harvest by Elliot Coleman. He is a commercial grower in Maine. He sells food year-round from unheated greenhouses, and he's got some wonderful information about harvesting all year round. It's very good reading. It's interesting reading. And that wraps up our planning and planting for fall and winter harvest class. I hope it was a blessing to you, and I want to remind you that you were created to live in the garden.